I've always believed that soil tells a story. Silt, clay, and bedrock are the Earth's memory, recording millennia of pressure, water, and seismic whispers. As a senior geotechnical engineer at TerraStruct Solutions, my job was to listen to that story and ensure that the multi-billion-dollar structures we built upon it had a foundation as certain as the past itself. For 15 years, I was their best listener. My masterpiece, my magnum opus, was supposed to be the Titan project. TerraStruct wasn't just a company, it was a colossus of chrome and glass in the heart of the city, a place where ambition was the currency and innovation was the gospel. I had thrived there. My performance reviews were a string of superlatives. My bonuses reflected a man at the top of his game. And my relationship with the senior partners was one of mutual, hard-won respect. Or so I thought. My specific expertise was in hydrogeological stability for sensitive infrastructure. In layman's terms, I stopped impossibly heavy, technologically delicate buildings from sinking into problematic soil. And the Titan project was the mother of all problematic sites. It was a Tier 4 data center for the tech behemoth Viridian Dynamics. A building designed to house the digital soul of a trillion-dollar corporation, located on a reclaimed coastal floodplain. The ground was a soupy, unpredictable mess, saturated with a high water table and prone to liquefaction during even minor seismic events. Everyone else said it was unbuildable, said they weren't listening hard enough for 18 months. I lived in geological survey data and simulation models. I designed a revolutionary foundation system I called the Aegis Matrix. It wasn't just a slab of concrete. It was a dynamic living system. It featured a lattice of deep-bored piles, a network of hydrostatic pressure release valves, and a proprietary array of fiber optic sensors that could detect microscopic shifts in real time, allowing the system to actively counterbalance soil pressure. It was predictive, not reactive. It was the most complex and elegant design of my career. It was, I state without ego, a work of genius. And Marcus Thorne knew it. Marcus was the embodiment of TerraStruct's ambition. A senior partner with a silver tongue, a Savile Row suit for every day of the week, and an unnerving ability to look you in the eye and see a stepping stone. He was the firm's top rainmaker, the man who brought in the Leviathan contracts. He and I had always maintained a professional, if distant, rapport. He handled the clients. I handled the ground beneath their feet. "Elias, my man," he'd said, clapping me on the shoulder just a month ago, his expensive cologne preceding him like a herald. "You've done it again." Viridian is ecstatic. The Aegis Matrix is what's closing this deal. It's the silver bullet. We were in the main boardroom, the one with the panoramic view of the city, the one reserved for triumphs. The mood was electric. The Viridian contract was worth a staggering $900 million. With TerraStruct's fee coming in at just under $50 million, it was the largest project in the firm's history. My design was the linchpin. I felt a surge of pride, the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman who knows his work is true. The betrayal, when it came, wasn't a dramatic explosion. It was a quiet, sterile email. A digital shiv slid between my ribs. The subject line was innocuous. Project documentation. Review? It was from Cynthia Davies, our head of HR. The email requested a meeting to discuss a minor discrepancy in the preliminary regulatory filings for a small municipal bridge project I had consulted on 6 months prior. I thought nothing of it. A typo. A missing form clerical noise. I walked into Cynthia's office. Space so beige it seemed to absorb sound and personality. Marcus was already there, sitting in one of the guest chairs, his expression a mask of feigned concern. A thick binder was on the table. "Red flag, Elias. Thank you for coming in," Cynthia began, refusing to meet my eyes. "We need to discuss a serious matter. It's come to our attention that the environmental compliance reports for the Northwood Bridge project were incomplete." "Incomplete?" I asked, my brow furrowing. I oversaw the geotechnical surveys. The environmental filings were handled by the civil team. Marcus leaned forward, his voice dripping with synthetic sympathy. That's the problem, Elias. We've reviewed the submission logs. The final packet was uploaded from your workstation under your credentials. And it seems a crucial addendum regarding soil contaminants was omitted. The EPA is flagging it. There could be significant fines. My mind raced. I vaguely remembered a junior engineer having trouble with the submission portal and asking to use my machine. It was a common occurrence, a small courtesy in a busy office. I can assure you I didn't personally handle that submission. It was likely an oversight by, we have your digital signature on the transmittal letter. Marcus cut in smoothly, tapping the binder. Look, we know you've been under a lot of pressure with the Titan project. It's understandable that something might slip through the cracks. It felt wrong. The tone was too funereal, the setup too neat. Cynthia finally looked at me, her gaze skittering away. Elias, the firm's liability here is substantial, given your senior position and direct oversight. She trailed off, letting the implication hang in the sterile air. What are you saying? Asked my voice. Dangerously quiet. The partnership has decided that a change in leadership on the geotechnical side is necessary, Marcus said, standing up. He was no longer playing the concerned colleague. He was the executioner. Your employment with TerraStruck is terminated, effective immediately. We feel it's the cleanest way to signal to the EPA and to Viridian that we're taking this lapse seriously. The air left my lungs, fired. Not for the Titan project, my magnum opus, but for a trivial, fabricated clerical error on a project I barely touched. It was a smokescreen, and a pathetically transparent one at that. The Titan project, I managed to say, the words feeling like gravel in my mouth. The Aegis Matrix. Marcus, it's my design. It's incredibly complex. Can't just hand it off. A cold smile touched his lips. I've been studying your work for months, Elias. I've been sitting in on your simulations. I think I have a handle on it. I'll be personally taking over as the lead engineer on the project. There it was. The entire sickening picture snapped into focus. He wasn't just getting me out of the way. He was stealing my life's work. He would stand on the foundation I designed and declare himself a king. The Northwood Bridge issue was the pretext, the flimsy excuse to dispose of the one man who could call him a fraud. I tried to fight. I demanded to speak to the managing partner, Richard Sterling. Cynthia informed me he was traveling and unreachable. I laid out the logic, the absurdity of firing the chief architect of the biggest project in the company's history over a minor. Unrelated issue. Marcus just watched me, his expression hardening into something reptilian. The decision is final. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings. You have 15 minutes. The walk back to my office was a blur. My colleagues, people I'd shared coffee and project deadlines with for years, suddenly found their shoes fascinating. The news had already spread. So I was no longer Elias Vance, geotechnical wizard, right? I was a liability, a ghost already haunting the halls. 2 stone-faced security guards stood by my door. As I boxed up photos of my wife and kids, a framed diploma, and a geological hammer that was a gift from my father. My eyes fell on my monitor. The screensaver was a 3D rendering of the Aegis Matrix, its intricate latticework glowing with a soft blue light. A wave of nauseating, white-hot fury washed over me. It was a violation more profound than theft. He had taken my name, my reputation, and my creation in one fell swoop. I was escorted from the building like a common criminal, my box of personal effects in my arms. The automatic glass doors slid shut behind me, sealing me off from the world I had built. I stood on the pavement, the city's indifferent traffic roaring past, and looked up at the gleaming tower of TerraStruck Solutions. They thought they had buried me. They thought they could erase me and build their flagship project on my intellectual bones. But I knew something they didn't. I knew the story the soil told. And I knew with chilling certainty that I had designed the one thing in the world that could bring Marcus Thorne and his stolen kingdom crashing down. The meeting with HR wasn't an ending, it was a declaration of war. The first week was a fugue state of impotent rage and administrative despair. My attempts to fight back through official channels were met with a wall of corporate concrete. My calls to Richard Sterling, the managing partner, went unreturned. My carefully worded email detailing the timeline and Marcus's obvious power grab was answered with a 2-sentence reply from a junior lawyer in Terrastruck's legal department, tersely reminding me of the non-disclosure and non-disparagement clauses in my employment contract. They had anticipated my every move, sealing the exits with legal threats. The professional devastation was absolute. In the tight-knit world of high-stakes engineering, reputation is everything. Within days, the story was out, artfully spun by Marcus's PR machine. Elias Vance, once a star, had become sloppy, a casualty of his own hubris. Letting a critical compliance issue slip through on his watch. He was a risk. The phone calls I made to contacts at other firms were met with polite but firm disinterest. I was radioactive. My wife Anna was my rock, her belief in me unwavering. I could see the fear in her eyes as our savings began to dwindle. The same fear I felt coiling in my own stomach every sleepless night. The injustice was a physical thing, a weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. They hadn't just fired me. They'd tried to unperson me. It was during one of those late nights, staring at the ceiling and listening to the house settle, that the rage began to cool and harden into something else, something colder, sharper. Just as if the official channels were bricked up, I would have to dig my own tunnel. My first move was to transform my despair into a project. The target, Marcus Thorne. The objective, not just to expose him, but to dismantle him using the very thing he had stolen. I turned our spare bedroom into a war room. I bought a new computer, a burner phone, and 3 large whiteboards. Severance package, which was insultingly small but came with a gag order I had no intention of honoring in spirit. Funded the operation. Phase 1 was reconnaissance. I couldn't breach Terrastruck servers, but I could scrape every byte of public data related to the Titan project. I devoured press releases, investor briefings, and articles in trade publications. Marcus was on a victory tour, his smug face plastered everywhere, accepting awards for his innovative design. In one interview with Global Engineering Weekly, he preened, "The Aegis Matrix is a paradigm shift. It required a holistic understanding of not just the geology, but the client's operational needs. It's a design born of experience." My experience. Then I found my first thread. It was buried in a long, tedious municipal planning board filing for the Titan project site. The filing included a list of approved material suppliers. I cross-referenced it with the original specifications from my design archives, which I had, by sheer luck, backed up to a personal cloud drive months before my termination. My design for the Aegis Matrix demanded a specific type of hydensity, sulfate-resistant concrete, a custom blend known as CR5, necessary to withstand the unique chemical composition of the site's groundwater. It was expensive, sourced from a specialized supplier in Germany. The supplier listed in the new public filing was different. It was a domestic company known for producing a cheaper, lower-grade blend, CR-2. My heart began to pound. On the surface, CR2 was similar, but it had a significantly lower tolerance for the exact kind of brackish, acidic groundwater prevalent at the Titan site. Over time, it would be susceptible to the site sulfate attack, nasty, insidious chemical reaction that turns concrete into a soft, mulchy paste. It wouldn't happen overnight. It would be a slow, creeping cancer in the heart of the foundation. Marcus, in his arrogance and desire to shave a few million off the top to boost his profit margin, had made a critical error. He saw my design as a blueprint, a set of instructions to be followed, but he didn't understand the why. He had swapped out a vital organ for a cheaper, weaker version. This was leverage, but I needed more. I needed a view inside the machine. That's when I thought of Nina Sharma. Nina was a data analyst at TerraStruck, whip-smart but perpetually overlooked. She was quiet, unassuming, and brilliant at navigating the labyrinth of the company's internal data streams. Marcus had once publicly humiliated her in a team meeting, dismissing her analysis on a different project as granular nonsense before repackaging her findings as his own insight a week later. She had been relegated to grunt work ever since. She hated him as much as I did, but for her own reasons. She was my potential ally. Finding her was tricky. I couldn't use my known phone or email. Kay used the burner and created a new anonymous social media profile. I found her on a forum for data visualization enthusiasts and sent a cryptic message. I have a data problem you might find interesting. It concerns a former colleague who appreciates granular nonsense. Meet me at the coffee shop on Elm Street if you're curious. 2 days later, she slid into the booth opposite me, her expression wary. She was clutching her phone, ready to bolt. Elias. What is this? She whispered, her eyes darting around the cafe. This is me offering you a chance to right a few wrongs, I said quietly. I laid it all out. The theft of my design, the fabricated excuse for my firing, my discovery about the concrete. I didn't ask her to do anything illegal. Not yet. I just asked a question. The project management software. I said, the daily logs. The internal messaging about the Titan project. Is there a way to track discussions about material procurement? Is there a digital paper trail for the switch from CR5 to CR2? Nina listened, her nervousness slowly being replaced by a familiar spark of intellectual curiosity. The spark Marcus had tried so hard to extinguish. He's an idiot, she breathed, a small, bitter smile on her face. He wouldn't cover his tracks on something like that. He'd justify it internally as a cost-saving measure and get some junior VP to sign off on it. She was hesitant. The risk to her was enormous. If she were caught, her career would be over. I'm not asking you to steal anything, Nina, I said, looking her straight in the eye. I'm asking you to be my eyes. Tell me what you see. Anonymous tips. No trace back to you. I'll take all the risk from there. She was silent for a long minute, staring into her cold coffee. He called my work nonsense, she said, more to herself than to me. And then he used it to get a bonus. She finally looked up, her decision made. The system runs automated security sweeps on data queries, especially on high-profile projects, but I've built the query protocols. I know their blind spots. Tell me what you're looking for. A week later, I received an encrypted email. It contained a single, heavily redacted PDF. It was a change order request submitted by Marcus. 3 weeks after I was fired, it detailed the substitution of CR2 concrete for CR5, citing significant cost efficiencies and negligible performance impact. The change was co-signed by Greg Peters, a sycophantic project manager known for being Marcus's lapdog. This was the proof. But it was still my word against a senior partner's. I needed more than a document. I needed to create a situation where this document became an undeniable, catastrophic liability. The final piece of the puzzle fell into my lap from the most unexpected of sources: the evening news. The lead meteorologist was standing in front of a swirling weather map, her expression grave. An unusually strong El Niño pattern is developing in the Pacific, she announced. Forecasters are predicting one of the wettest rainy seasons on record for our region, beginning in late autumn and continuing through the winter. Heavy, sustained rainfall, a saturated ground, a rising water table, and a foundation built with cheaper, vulnerable concrete. I looked at the weather map on the TV, then at the change order on my monitor, and finally at the 3D rendering of my Aegis Matrix. The soil was about to tell its story, a story of pressure and water. and Marcus Thorne, in his infinite arrogance, was about to be forced to listen. The abyss I'd been cast into now had a bottom, and I was ready to start climbing. The meteorologist's forecast was the starting gun. I had a timeline, a ticking clock defined by atmospheric pressure and ocean currents. The coming rain was the catalyst, the external force that would expose the fatal flaw Marcus had so carelessly engineered into the Titan project. Now, my task was to build the stage for his downfall. My first order of business was to remove one of Marcus's key pawns from the board. Greg Peters, the project manager who had eagerly co-signed the concrete change order, was a weak link. He was ambitious but insecure, a man whose loyalty was bought with praise and the promise of advancement. He was also a fraud in his own small way. During my time at Terrastruck, I'd overheard Greg boasting about his certifications in advanced project management and risk assessment. A little digging on my part, cross-referencing his LinkedIn profile with the official databases of the certifying bodies, revealed the truth. He had none of them. He'd simply padded his resume with acronyms. Using a public library computer and a secure anonymous email service, I drafted a tip to a well-known industry watchdog blog. I framed it as a concerned peer questioning the integrity of project managers at top-tier firms. I attached screenshots of Greg's public profile alongside confirmation from the certifying agencies that no one by his name held those credentials. I didn't mention Terrastruck or the Titan project. I didn't have to. I just lit the fuse and walked away. 2 weeks later, the blog ran a scathing article titled, "The Certification Charade. Are unqualified managers running your million-dollar projects?" Greg wasn't named directly, but the details were specific enough that anyone at Terrastruck would know. The fallout was immediate. An internal investigation was launched, and Greg, unable to produce the credentials he'd claimed for years, was quietly and unceremoniously fired. His dismissal served two purposes. First, it sent a ripple of chaos through the Titan project's day-to-day management. Greg, for all his faults, was the one handling the minutiae of scheduling and logistics. Marcus was a big-picture man, hated getting his hands dirty with details. Second, it isolated Marcus. He had lost his primary yes-man, the one person on the project team who would endorse his decisions without question. Meanwhile, Nina became my ghost in the machine. Working cautiously, she set up a series of low-ans-low data scrapes, pulling fragments of information from the project's internal servers. Her messages would arrive at odd hours, encrypted and sparse. Geotechnical sensor installation is 2 weeks behind schedule. Subcontractor dispute. Marcus overruled the new PM's request for additional groundwater testing. Cited budget overruns. Client Viridian sent an RFI about foundation curing times. Marcus assured them all specs were being exceeded. Each message was a nail in Marcus's future coffin. He was flying blind, drunk on his own authority, cutting the very corners my design was meant to eliminate. He saw the Aegis Matrix's advanced sensor array not as a vital nervous system, but as a feature he could skimp on to save time and money. The greatest challenge was my own isolation. I was working from a spare room, fueled by coffee and a burning sense of purpose, but the weight of the fight was immense. I sought out the one person whose mind I trusted as much as my own. Dr. Alistair Finch, my old mentor from university. He was a legend in the geotechnical world, a septuagenarian with a mind like a steel trap and a profound distrust for corporate shortcuts. I met him at his campus office, a wonderfully cluttered space that smelled of old books and chalk dust. I laid out the entire situation, omitting Nina's name to protect her. I showed him my original Aegis Matrix schematics, and then the change order specifying the CR2 concrete. Alistair listened intently, his fingers steepled under his chin. He studied the documents, his sharp eyes missing nothing. When I finished, he was silent for a full minute. He didn't just swap the concrete. "Elias," Alistair said finally, his voice a low rumble, "he lobotomized your design." The genius of the Aegis system wasn't just the materials. It was the synergy between the materials, the drainage channels, and the sensor feedback loop. Using a cheaper aggregate without recalibrating the entire system for its specific cure time and porosity is like putting diesel in a petrol engine. It might run for a little while, but catastrophic failure is not a possibility. It's a mathematical certainty. Its validation was like a bomb on my raw nerves. He helped me refine my theoretical models, plugging the new data into advanced simulators. The results were terrifyingly precise. Given the forecasted rainfall and the properties of the CR2 concrete, the models predicted the foundation would begin to exhibit microsettlement within 3 to 4 months. The shifts would be fractions of a millimeter, too small to be noticed by the naked eye, but for a Tier 4 data center, where server racks have to be perfectly level, it would be a death sentence. The key, Alistair advised, is not to let this become your word against his. You need an unimpeachable third party to deliver the verdict. You must become the arbiter of the very crisis you are predicting. That's when the final piece of the strategy clicked into place. I wouldn't just be the anonymous tipster. I would be the solution. Using the last of my severance, I did something that felt both insane and brilliant. I legally incorporated a new business, Vance Geotechnical Audits, LALC. I built a simple but professional website listing Dr. Finch as a senior advisor with his gleeful permission. I drafted a corporate profile that highlighted our expertise in diagnosing foundational failures in high-sensitivity environments. I was no longer Elias Vance, the disgraced engineer. I was the principal of a boutique, hyper-specialized consulting firm. Nina's role was becoming more dangerous. One evening, she called me from her burner phone, her voice tight with panic. The system flagged one of my queries, Elias. It was a deep dive on the hydrostatic sensor logs. IT security sent a notification to the project director. They think it's an external probe. They don't know it's me, but they're locking things down. I can't risk another search. It's okay, Nina. You've given me more than enough, I assured her, my own heart hammering. Go dark. Delete everything. You've done your part. She had given me the final element, the cheaper, less sensitive hydrostatic sensors Marcus had installed were already showing minor anomalous readings as the ground became more saturated from the early autumn showers. The existing project team, now led by a new and overwhelmed PM, was logging them as calibration errors. Just as I predicted, everything was in place. My consulting firm was ready. The evidence was compiled. The flawed foundation was curing. The secondary target who could have covered for Marcus was gone. That night, stood at the window of my war room, looking out at the dark sky. A fat drop of rain hit the glass, then another, and another. The storm had arrived. The clock was no longer ticking. It was ringing. The rain didn't just fall, it descended. For weeks, the sky was a bruised purple, unleashing a relentless deluge that the news anchors called historic. Rivers swelled, floodplains became lakes, and the ground became a sodden sponge. For the city, it was a nuisance. For me, it was the overture. At the Titan project site, the calibration errors in the foundation's hydrostatic sensors began to multiply. I knew this not from Nina, who had wisely gone silent, but from the simple laws of physics. The immense pressure of the saturated soil was pushing against the compromised concrete, and the cheap sensors Marcus had approved were screaming into the void. The first public sign of trouble came in the form of a terse, two-line press release from Viridian Dynamics, the client. It announced a minor delay in the data center's server installation schedule, citing the need for additional quality assurance checks on foundational infrastructure. Minor delay, additional checks. Corporate speak for we think something is seriously wrong and heads are going to roll. This was my cue. It was time to stop being the ghost in the machine and become the exorcist. Through Dr. Finch's esteemed network, I made it known that Vance Geotechnical Audit specialized in precisely this kind of problem. Dr. Finch himself made a call to a senior VP at Viridian he'd worked with years ago, lamenting the decline in engineering standards and casually mentioning a brilliant former protege of his who had just started a new auditing firm. While I waited for the inevitable call, I unearthed my final, most damning piece of evidence. Nina, in her last data transmission, had included a scan of a single page from the final regulatory submission packet, the official stamped plans for the foundation. And there at the bottom, next to the seal of a professional engineer, was a signature. It was scrawled, arrogant, and unmistakably mine, except I had never signed it. He had forged my signature. The revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow. This transcended corporate backstabbing. Marcus hadn't just stolen my design and slandered my name. He had committed felony-level professional fraud. He had stamped my name onto his compromised, dangerous version of my work, making me legally liable for the disaster he had created. If the foundation failed, the inquiry would lead back to that signature. My career wouldn't just be over. I could face prison. The game had changed. This was no longer about revenge. It was about survival. 3 days later, the call came. It was from a vice president of global infrastructure at Viridian Dynamics. His name was Arthur Galloway, and his voice was frayed with billion-dollar anxiety. Dr. Finch's recommendation had carried immense weight. They wanted to hire my firm to conduct an independent third-party audit of the Titan Projects Foundation. They needed answers, and TerraStruck wasn't providing them. "We're getting runarounds from their project lead, a Mr. Thorne," Galloway said, his frustration palpable. "He keeps insisting these are minor teething issues, but our preliminary analysis suggests potential settlement. Before we install $1 billion worth of servers, I need to know if the ground beneath them is stable. Can you help us?" "Mr. Vance, I believe I am uniquely qualified for the task, Mr. Galloway," I replied, my voice a mask of calm professionalism. The contract was signed within 24 hours. My fee was eye-watering, a testament to how desperate Viridian was. The irony was exquisite. TerraStruck's client was now paying me a fortune to investigate the very firm that had thrown me out. I scheduled the initial site visit and boardroom presentation for the following Monday. I requested that all relevant parties from TerraStruck be present, including the lead engineer Marcus Thorne. Walking back onto the TerraStruck campus felt surreal. I wasn't being escorted out with a box. I was striding through the main entrance with a leather briefcase, a visitor's badge that read Consultant, Viridian Dynamics, clipped to my lapel. People who had avoided my gaze months ago now offered nervous, questioning smiles. I was no longer a ghost. I was an omen. The confrontation was set for the same main boardroom where Marcus had celebrated stealing my work. The view of the rain-swept city was gray and somber. I was there first, setting up my laptop. Galloway from Viridian was on a large video screen, his face grim. Dr. Finch had asked to be patched in as well, a silent, intimidating presence. Then Marcus walked in. He was flanked by 2 TerraStruck VPs and a nervous-looking lawyer. When he saw me standing at the head of the table, his confident stride faltered for a half-second. A flicker of confusion, then irritation crossed his face. He didn't recognize my company name, but he sure as hell recognized me. "Vance," he said, his voice tight. "What are you doing here?" "This is a client-privileged meeting." "Here on behalf of the client, Marcus," I said calmly, gesturing to the screen where Galloway was watching. "Viridian has retained my firm to audit the foundation's integrity." The color drained from Marcus's face. He looked like he'd been tasered. The 2 VPs exchanged worried glances. The trap was sprung. He was cornered in his own boardroom with his own client, and he had no idea of the scale of the evidence arrayed against him. He tried to recover, puffing out his chest. "This is highly irregular," he blustered. "Hiring a disgruntled former employee is a clear conflict of interest." Galloway's voice boomed from the speakers, dripping with ice. "The only thing I'm interested in, Mr. Thorne, is the truth. Mr. Vance comes with the highest recommendation. Please, proceed, Mr. Vance. I clicked the first slide. It was titled Aegis Matrix, an independent audit. For the next 20 minutes, I delivered the presentation of my life. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make accusations. I simply presented the data. I started with my original design specifications. Then I showed the change order, substituting the CR to concrete. I displayed the chemical analysis of the local groundwater. I put up the meteorological data of the unprecedented rainfall. Then came the core of the argument, the simulation models Dr. Finch and I had perfected. Showing the thomosite sulfate reaction, the loss of compressive strength, the inevitable microsettling under load. With every slide, Marcus sank lower in his chair. The VPs were scribbling frantic notes. The lawyer just stared, his mouth slightly agape. The ongoing sensor anomalies, I explained, are not calibration errors. They are the first symptoms of systemic progressive structural decay. The foundation, as it stands, cannot be certified to meet Tier 4 operational parameters. Galloway's face on the screen was thunderous. What you're saying, Mr. Vance, is that the $900 million facility TerraStruck has built for me is defective. I'm saying it was built on a compromised premise, I corrected gently. There has been a fundamental deviation from the core engineering principles of the original approved design. Marcus finally found his voice, a desperate, cracking version of his usual baritone. This is a theoretical projection, a fantasy spun by a fired employee with an axe to grind. There is no definitive proof. Proof? I asked softly. I clicked to the final slide. On the left was a high-resolution scan of my own, real signature from my old employment contract. On the right was the forged signature from the final regulatory filing, the one that stamped his flawed design with my name and my professional liability. The two were similar, but forensically, undeniably different. The problem, Marcus, I said, looking him directly in the eye for the first time. Is that to save a few $1,000,000 you put my name on your mistake? That moves this from a question of mere incompetence into the realm of professional fraud and forgery. A collective gasp went through the room. The lawyer representing TerraStruck put his head in his hands. Galloway on the screen was silent, but his fury was a palpable force. Marcus Thorne stared at the two signatures on the screen. He had been so arrogant, so sure of his power, that he never imagined the man he'd thrown away could return not as a victim, but as the unimpeachable authority on his own crime. He was utterly, comprehensively, and beautifully ruined. The silence in the boardroom stretched for an eternity. It was a dense, heavy quiet, broken only by the sound of the rain lashing against the panoramic window. Marcus Thorne sat frozen, his gaze fixed on the two signatures projected on the screen behind me. The image was his death sentence. And he knew it. Arthur Galloway's voice finally broke the spell, crackling from the speakers with the force of a tectonic plate shifting. Mr. Thorne, you are to have no further contact with this project or anyone at Viridian. Your firm's legal counsel will be hearing from mine within the hour. The word fraud will feature prominently. We are invoking every penalty clause in our contract. He paused, his voice dropping to a lethally quiet register. And as for you, Mr. Vance, send me a proposal for what it will take to fix this. Spare no expense. The screen went black. The two TerraStrucks who had been Marcus's allies moments before now looked at him with a mixture of terror and contempt. They were no longer seeing a rainmaker. They were seeing the man who had just blown $1 billion hole in the company's hull. The firm's lawyer, a man paid to manage. Risk looked at Marcus as if he were a walking environmental disaster. Marcus, one of the VPs said, his voice barely a whisper. Is this true? Marcus didn't answer. He slowly rose to his feet, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume on a broken man. He didn't look at his colleagues, he looked at me. The reptilian confidence was gone, replaced by a hollow, defeated emptiness. Without a word, he turned and walked out of the boardroom, a man walking toward his own execution. He was fired before he reached the elevator. And I later learned that both Viridian and the State Engineering Board filed charges the very next day. His career wasn't just over, it was annihilated. The aftermath for TerraStruck was brutal and swift. They were in breach of contract, exposed to colossal lawsuits, and their reputation was in tatters. To mitigate the damage, they had no choice but to accept Viridian's terms, which included hiring my firm, Vance Geotechnical Audits, to oversee the remediation of the Titan project. My proposal was audacious. It involved a highly complex, incredibly expensive process of underpinning the entire existing structure and injecting a specialized resin to halt the concrete decay, all while retrofitting the foundation with the proper Aegis Matrix sensor array. The cost was astronomical, effectively wiping out TerraStruck's entire profit margin and then some. They had no choice but to agree. My first invoice alone was more than 10 times my annual salary had ever been. The professional vindication was absolute. The story ripped through the industry, but this time the narrative was the true one. Marcus Thorne, the corporate sociopath, and Elias Vance, the brilliant engineer who had been wronged and returned as his firm's savior and executioner. In one, the same people who hadn't returned my calls months ago were now flooding my inbox with partnership offers and consulting opportunities. My relationship with Nina was repaired over a quiet, uncelebratory dinner. I transferred a signing bonus to her account from my new company's coffers that was large enough for her to quit her job at the now toxic TerraStruck and take a year off to travel or do whatever she wanted. She was hesitant to accept, but I insisted. This was never just about me, I told her. It was about justice. You were essential. Her smile, free from the anxiety that had shadowed it for months, was part of the victory. But the most profound resolution wasn't financial or professional. It was personal. One evening, months later, I was standing on the Titan project site. It was now my site. Under my direction, crews were working around the clock, implementing the very design I had conceived in my head years ago. The rain had stopped, and the setting sun cast a golden glow over the massive structure. I thought about the moral complexity of my actions. I had been driven by a primal need for revenge, and I had walked an ethical tightrope to get it. I had used deception, manipulated people, and took immense risks. But looking at the solid, stable foundation taking its true shape, I felt a sense of peace. I hadn't just destroyed a man's career. I had prevented a potential catastrophe. I had protected my own name and legacy. I had ensured the thing I created would exist as it was meant to, true and strong. The revenge was satisfying, but the restoration was what healed the wound. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Anna. Are you coming home soon? The kids want to show you their Lego tower. I smiled. The anger that had fueled me for so long had finally burned itself out, leaving behind not emptiness, but clarity. I had been to the abyss and back. I had faced the monster and discovered that the best weapon was simply being better at my job than he was at his crimes. The soil tells a story. And now, so did I. It was a story of betrayal and despair, but it was also one of resilience, strategy, and the ultimate triumph of competence. I had listened to the earth, and in the end I had made sure the truth was built upon a foundation of solid rock. I typed back to my wife on my way and walked away from the site, not looking back. My work there was done.